Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to give you the mic. We're so blessed to have you here, brother.
Oh, ah. Love you, bro. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bart. That was quite an intro. I haven't gotten choked up like that at 7:30 in the morning in a long time. But it's awesome to be with you guys this morning, guys. I am privileged. Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity again to speak. Mike, that was great. Thank you for your testimony. And it's amazing how rejection, the most familiar rejection, can bring a blessing into our lives. So, as Barton mentioned, I've been coming to NCS since 2012. And I actually am part of NCS in Manhattan, so it's good to be out here in the burbs with you guys. Back in the city, we have real problems, real temptations. So I'll share a little bit of those with you today. But yeah, it's great to be in the promised land where NCS all started. Jim Lane's a good friend of mine. He and I still talk a lot. Was anyone there at the retreat in DC where the Gym Father routine was going on? Yeah. I think after we saw that, we knew that was the beginning of the end for Jim, right? His ego became his amigo. No, I love Jim, and it's great to see how God had turned his weakness and really how the world, and turned his weakness and the church's rejection of him into a movement, which is right here. So, and I think that is what NCS is all about in a nutshell. So, really grateful for that. I'm going to talk a little bit just about some of my life experience, some lessons I've learned. Another great pick. Wow, I didn't know. Paul, do you have access to my Instagram or something? How'd you get these? And I'm just going to tell you about two big mentors who are in my life. BJ was one of them, and then my dad. My father was another one. And I'll give you just a quick snapshot before I dive in. So since 2020, this has been my life in a nutshell. So went through a pandemic, as all of us went through, right? We experienced that in our unique way. So went through a pandemic. My mom died of Alzheimer's. My immediate family, besides my mom, of course, then moved to Nashville, out of New York, where I grew up. I got a new job, a company called Wonder, which I've been at for 3 years and got promoted a couple times. BJ died, so a lot of you guys knew. Just raise your hands. Who knew BJ personally and knew him well? Yeah, so a little less than half. BJ died. I bought my first home in New York City on the Upper East Side. I met my future wife, Erica. She'd be really excited to know that she's up there right now. Wonder bought another company and merged together, which has created a lot of challenges. If you guys have ever been part of companies that have merged, sometimes, even though you're the one acquiring, you can kind of be on the bad side of that. So that's been a challenge. And then I got engaged last month. And I say all that because in the past 5 years, I've experienced death, change, favor, opportunities, the gift of romance, new beginnings, new endings. And through it all, I felt God has been faithful to me in every step of the way. Through every up, through every down, I feel like his steadfast love has been closer than ever. And I've also realized, I've heard it said in sermons, but then when you actually experience it in life, it kind of moves from your head to your heart, that God's grace is most palpable in the valley, that we really don't understand God's grace. We might thank him for great things and blessings, but we really don't understand the magnitude of his grace unless we're in the valley and faced with things that are out of our control. I wish my dad was here. I spoke at NCS Manhattan back in May, I think it was, and speaking now, and I just, looking back to 2012 when my dad introduced me to NCS, I just realized how proud of me he would be right now if he saw this moment. And obviously sometimes in life we don't get to share those moments with people that we want to. But obviously God doesn't make mistakes. And I've also learned in life that life is less about 7 easy steps to make yourself better or to make your life better or more prosperous. And life in reality is actually more about the turbulence that we see in the Psalms, right? The jubilation, the groaning, the deep, deep repentance, the mistakes, the learning, the trusting, the peace. And the Psalms are really, in my mind, and this is something I talked to Jim about, is really paradox after paradox, right? Of one day saying, God, where are you? And to the very next verse saying, God, you're never going to leave me. And I think that's where the growth has really started for me, and where I'm really appreciative for. And I think one of the biggest paradoxes, which BJ would always talk to me about, especially in the wake of my parents being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and then Parkinson's, is that sorrow and joy are commingled in the Christian faith. And you can never have one without the other. And the cross is a perfect epitome of that, right? There is sorrow in the cross as we see our Savior nailed to a tree, and then there's joy in understanding what he's done for us. And holding that sorrow and joy at the same time has been something that I've been wrestling with a lot. So I just to throw it back a little bit. I mentioned I came to NCS back in 2012. I actually remember my first meeting. My dad took me to NCS. He had actually been to the Mohawk Mountain House for a retreat. He had been down, I think it was Hershey. Was there one in Hershey Park? Yeah. So my dad's been around NCS his name was Gary Billings. He's been around NCS for a while, and it's one of the greatest things that he's ever done for me. My dad put me through college, gave me a great life in Westchester, protected me physically, was always there for me when I was sick. But I think the best thing he's ever done is introduce me to NCS, because it's changed my life in so many ways. It's transformed my faith. I'm just so grateful for that. So I know that there's been a couple times where I know Chip, you brought Connor to one of the meetings. I'm sure James will be a future attendee of NCS. Every time I see a father and son in NCS, it just kind of chokes me up, and I got to remind them, like, I think I've talked to Connor and said, like, don't take this for granted. This is a special time. And I think the other thing, too, that I learned through NCS is that sometimes you do have to go through things in life. You have to experience them yourself in order to change and grow. But sometimes you can just hear the story from somebody else's mouth and realize, I don't want to go down that path. So when I was in my early 20s, and I would go to NCS Manhattan and Brasbury Ruhlman, and I would see guys stand up there and talk about divorce and bankruptcy and infidelity and their own wives maybe cheating on them or going to prison, right? Mike and Chip, if you guys have experienced, I don't need to go through those things to understand how heartbreaking they are and to understand those mistakes and the gravity of them. And I'm thankful for that, because I think as men, when we go through that healing process, God takes us to the valley and then to the mountain. I think it's an obligation that we have to share to admonish other people, especially young guys, to say, hey, put your hand on their shoulder and say, hey, like, I've been through this path, and you don't have to go through it to understand the heartbreak, because there are natural consequences in life. There are things that we still have to go through to get out of those ruts. So, also, I was born back in 1989, April 2nd, 1989. I'm not going to take you through my whole life, tell you what happened on April 3rd and April 4th, because I don't have enough time. But I grew up in Westchester. I was kind of a miracle baby in two ways. My parents took them almost 12, 15 years to conceive and to have me. So my mom was 43, my dad was 45 when I was born. So I was a miracle baby in that sense. And then also on April 2nd, 1989, it was a Sunday, my mom woke up and felt like something was wrong with me. She had there's nothing physical about her that revealed that. She just felt like something was off. And the doctor had said my umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck and could have choked me. If I'd stayed in her womb any longer, I could have been dead. So I always felt like the Lord had been looking after me even before I had even breathed air on this earth. And I'm really grateful for that. And just, again, it kind of reminds me that when I get into my own funk and try to control things, I realize that God had been looking after me before I was even born. I had a really great childhood. My dad retired, actually, when I was in high school. So he actually only worked about 20 years and provided for us. But I remember when he quit and when I was joining Hackley, or Hogwarts, as Bart showed, and I was really thankful for that. A lot of my friends' dads were still working, and still going to the city, still making money. As you can imagine, my mom didn't like it too much when my dad quit his job and started to infiltrate her domain, being our house. But I was really grateful for that. I'm glad that my dad chose, the eulogy virtues instead of the resume virtues, as David Brooks has said. And I remember my dad being very present, coming to sporting events with me, helping me academically in school, just showing up, going to church. We played golf together. He was a very present father, and he was very emotionally available to me. And I remember that more than anything. Anything he got me physically or materialistically, I remember his emotional presence more than anything, which is great. And then my faith journey, I actually went to Catholic school when I was in kindergarten, and which was great for me. It planted a seed. I learned the liturgy, learned a lot about theology. But that was also a time where I feel like I fell subconsciously into works righteousness. And I looked at my relationship with God as constantly something I had to earn. It was something where I really believed that I was saved through grace, but that I constantly had to stay saved by working on my own merit, by trying to earn God's love. It produced a lot of internal pressure, a lot of external pride. And it's one of those things where I just felt like God's law was twisted in my mind as something I still had to continue to achieve instead of something that had been fulfilled and that I did out of love. And so I'll get back to that in a second. But when I went to Villanova, I had another great experience. As Bart showed, I'm a huge Villanova fan. I actually grew up in New York. So right now, my third idol is actually the Knicks, because you guys know there are 3 Villanova players who are doing well. So it's a great time for me. And that's actually when I was in college in Villanova, my dad introduced me to Tim Keller's sermons. As you guys know, Tim Keller, another guy who passed away in the past couple of years, big, icon of NCS. And that just helped me see the gospel in a new light. And I remember when my mom got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, my dad would walk around Rockefeller Park up in Westchester and just constantly listen to Tim Keller messages on hope. He felt like that was the only thing that he could really cling to in the moment, because there's no cure for Alzheimer's. It's a progressive disease. You lose your loved one in every single way, as you guys may know. Hopefully no one has a spouse or anyone who has experienced that. But that was just a good model for me, that he really leaned into his faith during that time. He didn't get angry with God, but he just tried to cling and hold on to hope, which is all you really have in that moment. But I then realized through listening to Tim just how different my experience of Christianity as a child was from the reality, about how it's not good advice about stuff we have to do, but good news about what Christ has done for us. And I also learned about just like my whole perception of sin changed too. I thought obviously sin was doing bad things, breaking the law, which it is, but I didn't realize that it was actually an over desire that I had for really good things, which led me to then make mistakes and to make decisions and to have disordered loves, as of course St. Augustine, if you guys may know, Villanova's Augustinian school, so I had to give St. Augustine a shout out. But how those disordered loves, you cling on to something really good, you knock God down in the totem pole, and then you start to make choices that aren't aligned with his will. And for me, a lot of those choices came romantically, came through poor decisions I made with women, going out, dating, drinking, and not too far off actually from what from the WeWork video, unfortunately. Not that intense, but I just learned to see what really drove me, what I've been living for, and honestly just began a journey of honesty with myself and really addressing the idolatry in my life, things that were controlling me, as well as the fact that I thought I was using God. And that was like a hard realization for me to come to, is that I really felt like I was just using God in my life for him to give me what I wanted, for him to make me feel good, for him to give me confidence, for him to just fulfill my own agenda instead of stepping into his story and stepping into his will, and being part of something bigger than myself. And it would manifest itself socially too. I mean, I love people. I work in sales. I've been working in sales. My fiance and I are about the opposite. She refuels by laying on the couch, and I refuel by going to Blue Haven and watching a football game on a Sunday. But I became obsessed with people pleasing. I wanted to just be liked by everyone all the time. I would get invited to events, and I'd be invited to 3 events on one night, RSVP yes to all of them, just because I didn't want to say no, and then cancel on people at the last minute, cancel on dinners, cancel on friends, and I realized I had just a weird tendency to do that to people, and ultimately hurt people even more through those tendencies. And even when I was dating, in my dating life, I looked at every single date. I probably went on 300 or plus dates in New York City when I was single, and I looked at those as opportunities just to make myself feel good, to get validated. I didn't have necessarily a lot of you guys know Bart's story. I didn't necessarily have a lust issue physically with sex, but I had a validation issue where every single time I just wanted the woman I didn't want to sleep with them. I just wanted them to know that I was invited back to their apartment. And then say, oh no, that's probably not a good idea. But then by that time, it was too late, right? So, BJ used to call me an affirmation junkie, which it was probably an apt term for that. And I just realized too that, sometimes God's rejection for things in our life is protection. Sometimes I definitely do feel like God rejected certain things in my life to protect me. But then I also realized that sometimes rejection just means that you have a bad character flaw, that you have a bad personality trait, and it's not necessarily, evil or sin or temptation but it's maybe just your stupidity, as BJ would say. So when I went to NCS, I immediately was grabbed by BJ. I remember walking after a meeting, BJ grabbed my arm and said he wanted me to wrangle up some young guys and have dinner at his townhouse. And I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about him. I just knew that he would stand up after speakers would speak and just totally excoriate them and humiliate them in front of the entire NCS room. And if the guys could handle it, they would be invited back. And if they couldn't, you would never see him again. So it was a good litmus test. But I love BJ. For about 5 years, I went to his townhouse about once a week. And we would have a dinner, and the dinner would just be centered around, not necessarily Bible study, but just around openness, around transparency, around honesty. That was really his tool. He would use humor as a tool to really break into people, and then use it as a segue to have honest conversation about faith and about where we stood. He would use a tactic, too, of inviting me over for dinner early and helping me cook. And a lot of times I would say, Beach, I got a job. I can't come over an hour early and help you chop onions, man. Like, I got a real life. I'm not living like a hobbit in a townhouse like you. And but then when I started going over there early, I realized he just used that as a way to pour into me and to speak life into me. And BJ had, as guys like Chip and Bartneau and Paul, BJ had ways to really break you down during mundane, everyday moments, which was great. And he was really our Yoda. So a couple things I wrote down that I remember he would, really speak into us was the dangers of morality and white-knuckling our way through life. Being constantly aware of measuring ourselves against ourselves, measuring ourselves against other men, measuring ourselves against idealism. He'd warn us about idealism and how it can affect our relationships, especially romantic ones. A lot of guys, especially in their 20s, going out trying to find the perfect woman with the perfect physical traits, perfect personality traits, and he would just really admonish us about that and say how idealism can just be a destroyer of relationships because you're not leaning into reality, which is actually where the real beauty is. And then he would also always say to us that God is greater than our sorrows. God's grace is always greater than our sorrows. And he'd really emphasize that. And as you guys know from BJ's life, BJ had a lot of sorrows. BJ had a lot of relationships he wrecked, a lot of people he hurt. Whenever he would say that, I could really see it on his face that he meant that. And one thing he always used to say, too, was that the opposite... Actually, let's say if you guys remember this. According to BJ, what is the opposite of love? All right, well, we have some insider traders over there. But yes, he'd always say the opposite of love is control. And I'd never heard that before. I thought it was a great way of putting it. And I realized that as men, we have that issue, right? And every time I realized I was not loving someone properly, whether it's my fiance, someone at work, my sister, a friend, I realized that it was all about control for me. It was all about me wanting to get my way and trying to control the relationship, which is the opposite of love, because obviously love is part of free will. So, and then one of the last things he would say to us is about admonishing us about how our personas can be a hindrance to connecting with people, right? So our personas, who we are as men, obviously as we're growing up in our formable years, in our 20s and our 30s, we realize that we're good at things. We realize maybe you're the funny guy, maybe you're the smart guy, maybe you're the athletic guy, the rich guy, the good-looking guy. Bart is none of the above, as you guys can tell. But when you realize that you're good at something, that can create a persona, and BJ would always try to destroy that in us. Whenever he saw guys who were leaning into that persona, whenever he saw guys that were not acting authentically or with not acting genuinely, and they were giving into their persona instead of being truthful and real, he would always try to blow that up into a million pieces, and do it in a way that was his unique way, which would start with love, and then if he wasn't getting the messaging across, it would then turn into humiliation, and then he would pull you aside and basically back you into a corner, which I had many times. But yeah, his whole ministry is about availability and showing up. And do we actually have the picture, Paul? The next one, yeah. So this is a picture. of my dad and I. So I'm going to get into this a little bit. So that's my dad on the left, obviously, and BJ on the right. This is in BJ's townhouse, which I'm sure a bunch of you have been to. My dad and BJ were very similar guys. I actually had a similar relationship to both of them, which I was really fortunate. But this is when, as you can tell, BJ doesn't have hair here. This is when he was going through cancer treatment. And in the couple last years of his life, my dad and I would go to his townhouse in the city for dinner, which was great. But just to transition a little bit, so my mom, as I mentioned before, she died in 2021, and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Does anybody here have any friends or family that have had Alzheimer's, dementia? Okay. Yeah, so sadly, quite a number. And I remember my dad sitting down with us and telling my sister and I, we were in our living room, and I didn't really know what Alzheimer's was at the time. I really didn't understand it. But it's a terrible disease, as you guys know, that robs you of your humanity, really. It's not just about forgetting a name or forgetting your keys or losing, your direction in life, but, I could see that it changed my mom a lot. You totally lose control of your neurological function. And it was really brutal and straining for us. But the way that my dad handled it and loved my mom, set a really good example for me and a great precedent. I remember just being on the beach with her sometimes, and I would have to read. She loved to read on the beach, and there's a time where she couldn't read anymore, so I'd have to read to her. I remember being in restaurants and she couldn't cut up her food, so I'd be 24, 25 years old, cutting up my mom's food for her. When we were out, people would notice, so they would, sometimes my mom would just get up and leave the table and start wandering around. We have to go find her. And people would say things to us, which was nice. People would acknowledge and just, as they left, tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, I understand what your mom's going through, and I'm really sorry, and you guys are such a great family. And I appreciate that. I mean, it's like all tragedies where you never wish it or hope it, but you have no choice but to lean in and just to hopefully make it something that can bring your family closer together, which it did for us, fortunately. And that's a whole testament to my dad, who's up here. I remember him saying to me, actually, that she had it for 10 years, 5 years she lived at home, 5 years she was in a facility. And I remember my dad saying to me that the 5 years when she lived at home were actually 5 of the best years of their marriage, that they actually went back to their original honeymoon phase in a way, because my mom just gave up about worrying about all the minutia. My dad gave up on trying to be perfect and trying to control things. And they both had a newfound purpose in each other, and it was just a perfect, recipe of where they both kind of gave up, right? They both surrendered to each other and gave 100% of themselves to each other, and it was beautiful to see my dad do that. He really washed my mom's feet. Sometimes would literally have to get down on his knees, wash her, take care of her. I was talking to Paul last night about how even one time she woke up in the middle of the night and just had excrement all over her. And my dad had to put her into the shower and hose her down, put a robe on her. And, my dad loved her like the father and the prodigal son, and really loved her as Christ loved us. And I just watched him do that, and I was just really grateful and thankful for the example that he set. And when I would go visit her in the facility, she actually would, I never really understood my mom's faith too much. I mean, she's from Tennessee. I don't know if you guys have ever been down south. You go to church, and it's kind of it's like Hillsong in a way, except the opposite. No one's wearing tight jeans, but it is a spectacle in a way. And it's like, if you don't have a shirt and tie on, then are you really saved, And I didn't really understand my mom's faith too much, but I remember being in the facility with her. I would read the Psalms to her from my phone, and I'd look up, and all she would be saying is Jesus, the blessed name. She'd say, Jesus, Jesus. And that's all it took. And I would think about the verse that all it takes for us to be saved is to say the name of Christ and to reach out to Jesus. And I knew in that moment, I felt an assurance that my mom was going to be with the Lord. So fast forward, I know I have about 6 minutes left. So my dad was then unfortunately diagnosed with Parkinson's. So another neurological disease, a muscular disease too, which hopefully you guys don't know too many people have had this. But Parkinson's is not like Alzheimer's. It is like the lesser of two evils in a way. But again, I remember when my dad told my sister and I that he had Parkinson's and just how devastating that was because, I just lost my mom, and she wasn't dead yet, but she was in the facility, and now I have my dad who has Parkinson's. So obviously, really that was really tough on my sister and I. My dad handled it like a pro, though. He had it for about 8 years. And in that time, my dad and I became really, really close. And we were always really close. Like I mentioned, back in high school, he kind of planted the seed for our emotional intimacy and relationship. But we came really close back in my mid-20s up until when he died last year. I would go home a lot on the weekends. I would cook for him. I'd spend a lot of time with him. We'd watch sports together. We'd watch movies together, smoke cigars together, and just enjoy life. My dad, like if he was alive today, I would have made him the best man at my wedding because he truly was my closest male relationship. And I always respected him as my father and respect him as my dad. And I always would do things for him whenever he asked me to. But I loved him as a friend, and I connected with him as a friend, which is funny because we go to one place, Sleepy Hollow, a lot, and the manager would say, "Oh, it's the Billings brothers." And that's how close we were, that people thought we were really like brothers, but of course we were 45 years apart, generations apart. It was just we could talk about any subject together. He was just so compassionate, so tender. But also I knew that he had grown up. He had a really rough childhood. I was talking to Paul about it last night, about how my grandfather, his father, was a womanizer, physically abused him, verbally abused him, would bring girlfriends into the house right in front of him and his mom and my aunt. And he just really grew up. He actually was born and raised in London. When he was 12, he came to the United States, and when he left on the Queen Mary. That's how old he was. He didn't even take a flight. He took a ship over, and he waved goodbye to his dad, thinking that he was going to see his dad again, and he never laid eyes on his father again. He thought he was just going to New York for Christmas, and he was going to come back. But in reality, my grandmother was divorcing him, and he never saw his father again. So he always would tell me when he grew up that he never wanted to be anything like his dad, that he always wanted, that his goal in life was to be the complete opposite of his father, which was a huge blessing to me. Again, another moment of God looking after me, because I had no control over that. And for him to say that and not just repeat a generational curse and have me suffer the way he suffered, and to take that blow was huge for me. And he always would say, "You're my best friend. I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. You always make me so happy." And he would just two quick examples of how he would show up. I remember one time when I was running around the city with Bart, so I could probably blame Bart for this story, but running around with Bart and other guys, and I racked up a huge credit card bill. I actually convinced my dad to open up a credit card in my name that was attached to his gold Amex card. And I said, "Hey, this is a good way for me to build credit in the city, and once I build credit, I'll get my own credit card." And I probably knew what I was doing, and ended up spending thousands of dollars on the card. And he found out, obviously it was connected to his statement, he found out, and I remember him calling me, and of course when you're 23, you have this trepidation. You're like, okay, I'm going to get reamed out right now. But he just said to me, he's like, "Your mom and I are on the phone, and we understand that you've been spending a lot of money on the card and making some bad decisions, and we're going to pay off the entire credit card. We're going to pay the entire debt in full, and we're going to wipe away all your debt. You don't have to pay anything back. You don't have to pay us. You don't have to pay the credit card company, but we're going to take the card away from you. And we want to basically just save you from yourself, and you're going to have to take out your own card, and you're going to have to build credit on your own." And I remember just feeling relieved, almost deflated in a good way, where I was expecting something harsh, condemnation, shame. How could you do this, make stupid decisions? And instead, my dad really treated me like the Lord treated me, wiped away my debt, but took it away so that I wasn't going to make any more bad decisions and harm myself. And then another thing I remember he did, two other quick things, where he said to me, I was in a relationship with a girl. It was a very physically charged relationship. I was over at her apartment all the time in the city. And I won't get into all the details. I'm happy to talk about it one-on-one, but obviously, as you guys know, with a lot of sex comes consequences. And we went through a pretty dark place, her and I together, because of those consequences of sex. And I remember telling my dad about it. And I strategically did in the car because, you can't yell at somebody who's driving 60 miles an hour too quickly. But I remember telling him about it. And again, my dad meeting me with compassion, meeting me with love. Again, not saying like, how could you be so stupid, shaming me, condemning me, but just like really trying to understand, ask me questions and walk me through it and really be a great father and partner for me. And I remember him actually taking me one time after an NCS meeting to St. Patrick's Cathedral. We were standing on the steps. And he said to me, this is the dangers of, he basically just said to me, you can't be a Christian and continue to sleep around and sleep with women and have sex with your girlfriend, and you're never going to learn to grow in intimacy with the Lord if you continue to make these decisions against his will. And again, I never felt like he was shaming me. I felt like he was speaking truth into my life, being honest with me, and really taking the high road, and really looking after me. He wasn't absentee. He wasn't someone who just would slap me on the wrist and then leave, but he really was invested in my character. So I'll just end with this. I know we're at time now, so I will quickly end on this. So obviously, when my dad died, it was very tough. I felt a lot of mixed feelings, loneliness, regret that I didn't spend more time with him, sorrow, all the things our Lord experienced. But I also felt this like weird peace that I was happy for him because he suffered a lot. He was really struggling. He would tell me that when the time he turned 80, that he really just wanted to move on and go to heaven and be with the Lord, which was really hard for me to hear, but I definitely understood it. I started going to Redeemer counseling. I wanted to, grieve with hope and just kind of walk through this. And I also told my counselor that I wanted to be a light and a source of comfort for other people. And I've had a couple people since talked to me about it. We had a dinner at BJ's Townhouse with some people whose parents had Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and actually a good friend of mine from Villanova has reached out to me a couple times. His mom has Parkinson's, and he's called me a couple times to talk about it and to understand like my experience. And then last but not least, if you want to go to the next picture real quick, I got engaged last month. So as I mentioned before, thank you. She's a beautiful girl. Her name is Erica. She actually works at American Express. So she probably started that statement early on. But she's a wonderful woman. We actually both go to Central Presbyterian Church together. We met on Hinge, which, as you guys might know, is a dating app. We quickly realized we go to the same church, which is great, and our relationship has taken off. My dad would always say to me, like, find a woman who's kind-hearted, and she definitely has a beautiful heart. And she's smart, she's ambitious. We love to laugh together. For as many serious and conversations of depth that we have, we also just laugh and goof around with each other a lot, which I really love. And she's so supportive. She prayed over me last night before I came up here to talk. She sent me a text this morning. She truly is a rock and a ride or die partner. And she's been amazing. She's just been so amazing to me, and I'm really excited to marry her next June. And we've had so many honest conversations just about her family, about my family, and we really held up a mirror to each other. And she's called me out for stuff, probably stuff that Bart and all my other friends have called me out for the years, but when your future spouse calls you out for it, it kind of hits home a little bit more, which is great. And I'll just end on this quick email this was the last email that BJ had sent me before he died. He died in October of, 2022? And this was the last email that he sent to me right before he died. So the title of the email is Life. And he said, life, ... things that. He said, what are things that prevent spiritual growth? First one is seeking wealth without responsibilities to the wealth. Repentance without reconciliation, life without friends, accountability with people that affirm your actions but cannot confront your stupidity, not being able to be alone, not being able to serve the poor, unable to embrace forgiveness from the Lord, always looking for shortcuts spiritually, thinking sex with a potential partner is okay but is the one thing that will blow up a potential marriage in Christ, and then number 10, read the above. So you knew he was on. So I'll just end on that, guys. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and I appreciate being here.